The wind came at Lena sideways, carrying ice crystals that felt like broken glass against her face. Her boots, city boots, worn thin at the heel, sank into snow that had probably been there since October. It was March now. March, and the mountain looked like the dead of winter. She'd paid a man named Hutchins $40 to bring her up from Laramie. He'd stopped talking to her around mile 15 when the road turned to ruts, and the ruts turned to nothing at all. Now he sat on his wagon bench, reins slack in his hands, staring at her like she'd lost her mind. "This is it?" Lena asked. "This is it." Hutchins spat tobacco juice into the snow. "Homestead's up there. Quarter mile, maybe less. You sure about this, miss?" Lena looked up. The cabin was barely visible through the pines, just a dark shape against white, smoke rising thin and gray from a chimney. No lights in the windows. No movement. "He knows I'm coming. Sent word 3 weeks ago." Hutchins scratched his beard. Though knowing Ethan Cross, he probably didn't believe it. "Why not?" "Because you're number 9. Lena turned to look at him. "What?" "9. Hutchins held up his fingers like she might not understand the number. 8 women before you came up this mountain. Longest any of them stayed was 5 weeks. Shortest was 2 days. That was the Mackenzie girl. Pretty thing. Cried the whole way back down." Lena's chest tightened, but she kept her face still. "What happened to them?" "Mountain happened. Winter happened. Ethan happened." Hutchins shrugged. "Man's not cruel, if that's what you're thinking. Just hard. And this place is harder." "I didn't come here for easy." "Then you're either brave or stupid, and I ain't figured out which yet." He nodded toward her bag. "You got everything you need in there?" Lena glanced down at the worn canvas satchel sitting in the snow beside her feet. Everything she owned in the world fit inside it. 2 dresses, undergarments, a coat that was too thin, a comb, soap, the deed to a homestead she'd never seen, and a letter from a man she'd never met. "I've got enough," she said. Hutchins didn't look convinced. "I'll be back this way in a month. If you want to leave, I'll take you down. No charge." "I won't." That's what the last 3 said. Lena picked up her bag. The wind hit her again, colder this time, and she had to brace herself to keep from stumbling. She could feel Hutchins watching her, waiting for her to change her mind, to ask him to turn the wagon around. She didn't. She started walking. The snow was deeper than it looked. Every step sank her nearly to the knee, and within 10 yards her legs were burning. The air was so thin it felt like breathing through cloth. Her lungs ached. Her face went numb. But she kept moving, one step and then another, her eyes locked on that distant cabin. Behind her she heard the jingle of harness and the creak of the wagon turning. Hutchins was leaving. Good. She didn't want witnesses if she fell. The path, if you could call it that, wound upward through the pines. The trees grew close together here, their branches heavy with snow, blocking out what little sun made it through the clouds. It was darker under the canopy, colder, and Lena's breath came out in short white bursts that vanished almost instantly. Her hands were shaking, not from nerves, from cold. She should have kept her gloves on, but she'd taken them off to count the money she'd paid Hutchins, and now they were buried somewhere in her bag and she didn't have the strength to stop and dig them out. Just keep moving. The cabin came into view slowly, piece by piece. First the chimney, stone, solid, well-built, then the roof line, steep to shed snow. Then the walls, logs chinked tight with mud and moss. It was small, maybe 20 feet on a side, with a single window facing south and a door made of planks so thick they looked like they could stop a bullet. There was no porch, no garden, no sign that anyone had tried to make the place welcoming. Lena stopped at the base of the steps, 3 of them, carved into the frozen ground, and looked up. The door didn't open. She waited. Still nothing. "Hello?" she called. Her voice sounded small against the wind. No answer. She climbed the steps and knocked. 3 solid strikes with her knuckles, hard enough to hurt. Silence. Then, from inside, "It's open." Lena's hand hesitated on the latch. She'd imagined this moment 100 times on the train west, then another 100 times in the boarding house in Laramie, and 100 more on the wagon ride up. She'd imagined what he'd look like, what he'd say, whether he'd smile. She pushed the door open. The cabin was dark except for the fire in the hearth. It took her eyes a moment to adjust, and when they did, she saw him. Ethan Cross stood with his back to her, feeding wood into the flames. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they'd been carved from the same wood he was burning. His hair was dark, long enough to touch his collar, and he didn't turn around when she stepped inside. "Close the door," he said. "You're letting the heat out." Lena shut the door behind her and stood there, dripping snow onto the floor, her bag still clutched in one frozen hand. Ethan added another log to the fire, then finally turned to look at her. He wasn't handsome, not in the way the photograph had suggested. His face was too rough, too weathered, with lines around his eyes that made him look older than 34. His jaw was hard, his mouth set in a line that didn't look like it smiled often. But his eyes, dark gray, like the sky before a storm, those were sharp. They took her in with one long sweep, head to toe, and she could see him cataloging everything. The wet coat, the thin boots, the bag that wasn't big enough. "You're smaller than I thought you'd be," he said. "You didn't come down to meet me. Didn't see the point, figured you'd turn around." Lena set her bag down. "I didn't." "I can see that." He crossed his arms. "You know what you signed up for?" "I know what the letter said." The letter didn't say enough. He gestured toward the window. "This is it. No town within 20 miles. No neighbors within 10. Closest water's a spring half a mile east, and it freezes 4 months out of the year. We've got 60 acres, most of it rocks and pine. I've got 12 head of cattle, and I'll lose 3 of them before summer if I'm lucky. The garden won't grow anything but potatoes and turnips, and even those come up stunted." He took a step closer, and Lena could smell wood smoke and sweat, and something else, something like exhaustion. "I'm up every day before dawn, Whoopit," he continued. "I work until I can't see my hands in front of my face. I eat the same thing every night because there's nothing else. I don't go to church. I don't go to dances. I don't make small talk." He paused. "If you came here thinking this was going to be something it's not, you should leave now. Hutchins will take you back down." Lena met his eyes and didn't blink. "I didn't come here for comfort." "Then what did you come for?" "Same thing you're offering, a life that's mine." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or suspicion. He studied her for a long moment, and Lena forced herself to stand still under the weight of his gaze. "You ever worked a homestead before?" he asked. "No." "You ever milked a cow?" "No." "Butchered a chicken?" "No." "Split wood? Mended fence? Hauled water?" "No." She lifted her chin. "But I can learn." Ethan almost laughed, not a real laugh, just a short, bitter sound that barely made it past his teeth. "That's what they all said. I'm not them. You don't know that yet." "Yes," Lena said quietly, "I do." For a moment, the cabin was silent except for the crackle of the fire. Ethan's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, just slightly, like a door that had been locked for years suddenly remembering it had hinges. "There's a room in the back," he said finally. "Small, no stove. You'll have to sleep with extra blankets." "That's fine. Ma, I'll expect you up at 5, earlier if the stock needs tending. I'll be up. You'll eat what I eat. I'm not cooking separate meals." "I don't expect you to." He nodded once, then turned back to the fire. "Get settled. We'll start tomorrow." Lena picked up her bag and walked to the back of the cabin. The room he'd mentioned was barely bigger than a closet, just enough space for a narrow bed and a trunk with a broken latch. There was no window, no lamp, no mirror. The walls were raw logs, and the floor was dirt packed so hard it felt like stone. She set her bag on the bed and sat down beside it. Her hands were still shaking. Not from the cold now, from something else. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. She was here. The next morning, Lena woke to the sound of boots on frozen ground. It was still dark outside. She fumbled for her coat, her fingers clumsy with sleep and cold, and stumbled out of the tiny room into the main cabin. Ethan was already dressed, standing by the door with a lantern in one hand and an axe in the other. "You up?" he asked. "I'm up." "Good. Let's go." She didn't have time to ask where. She pulled on her boots and followed him out into the pre-dawn dark. The cold hit her like a fist. She gasped, and the air burned going down. Ethan didn't slow. He walked fast, the lantern swinging in his hand, cutting a path through the snow toward a low structure she hadn't noticed the night before. A barn, or what passed for one. The roof sagged in the middle, and the door hung crooked on leather hinges. Inside, the air smelled like animals and hay and manure. Lena could hear the cattle shifting in the dark, their breath steaming in the cold. Ethan hung the lantern on a nail and turned to face her. "You ever milked a cow?" "You asked me that yesterday. The answer's still no." "Then watch." He grabbed a bucket and a three-legged stool and sat down beside the nearest cow, a big roan with wild eyes and a switching tail. The cow didn't look happy about being awake. Ethan didn't care. He leaned in, his hands moving quick and sure, and within seconds Lena heard the steady rhythm of milk hitting the bucket. "You're going to do the next one," he said without looking up. "I don't know how." "I just showed you." "You didn't explain anything." "Don't need to explain, you've got eyes." Lena clenched her jaw. She wanted to argue, to tell him that watching wasn't the same as knowing, but she didn't. She just moved to the next stall, picked up the second bucket, and sat down beside a cow that looked even meaner than the first. The cow turned its head and stared at her. Lena stared back. "Get on with it," Ethan said from the other stall. Lena reached out slowly, her hands hovering near the udder. The cow shifted and Lena pulled back. "She can smell your fear," Ethan said. "I'm not afraid." "Then prove it." Lena gritted her teeth and grabbed hold. The cow kicked. Not hard, just a warning, but enough to knock the bucket over and send Lena sprawling backward into the straw. Ethan didn't help her up. He just kept milking. Lena got to her feet, righted the bucket, and tried again. This time, the cow let her. It took her 20 minutes to fill half a bucket, 20 minutes of fumbling and cursing and getting kicked twice more. But she did it. When she finally stood up, her back aching and her hands cramping, Ethan was already done. He'd milked 3 cows in the time it took her to do half of one. He glanced at her bucket. "That'll do?" It wasn't praise, but it wasn't criticism either. Lena followed him back to the cabin, carrying the bucket with both hands to keep from spilling it. Her arms shook with the weight. Inside, Ethan poured the milk into a pitcher and set it aside. Then he pulled out a skillet, cracked 4 eggs into it, and started cooking. "You know how to make bread?" he asked. "No." "Coffee?" "Yes." "Then make coffee." Lena found the pot, the grounds, the water. Her hands were still clumsy from the cold, and she spilled half the grounds on the floor, but she got it done. They ate in silence. The eggs were plain. No salt, no butter, nothing. But Lena was too hungry to care. She cleaned her plate and drank 2 cups of coffee, and when Ethan stood up to leave, she stood too. "Where now, Mshup?" she asked. He looked at her like he'd forgotten she was there. "Wood." "I'll help." "You'll slow me down." "Then I'll learn to go faster." Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Then he handed her an axe. Atit. By the end of the first week, Lena's hands were covered in blisters. By the end of the second, the blisters had burst and bled and started to callus. She learned to milk the cows without getting kicked. She learned to split wood without hitting her own foot. She learned to haul water from the spring in buckets that felt like they weighed 100 pounds each. She learned that Ethan didn't talk unless he had to. She learned that the mountain didn't care how hard you worked. It just took and never gave anything back. But she also learned something else. She learned that she could survive this. Every morning, she woke before dawn. Every night, she fell into bed too tired to dream. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. Her clothes were too thin. Her boots were falling apart, and there were days when the wind was so cold she thought her lungs might freeze. But she didn't leave, and Ethan noticed. He didn't say anything, he wasn't the type, but she could see it in the way he started leaving tasks for her without explanation, trusting she'd figure them out. The way he stopped watching her like she might bolt at any second. One night, 3 weeks in, he came back to the cabin after checking the stock and found her mending a hole in his coat. He stopped in the doorway. "You don't have to do that." "I know." Lena didn't look up. "But it needs doing." He stood there for a moment, and she could feel him trying to decide what to say. Finally, he just nodded and sat down by the fire. That night, for the first time, they ate dinner at the same table instead of on opposite sides of the room. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The storm came in late April, when the snow should have been melting. Instead, it fell harder than anything Lena had seen yet, thick, heavy flakes that piled up faster than they could shovel. The wind howled like something alive, and the temperature dropped so low that the water in the cabin froze solid overnight. Ethan was outside before dawn, trying to get the cattle into the barn before they froze to death in the open. Lena didn't wait to be asked. She grabbed her coat and followed. The wind nearly knocked her over. She had to lean into it just to stay upright, and even then she could barely see 3 feet in front of her face. "Lena!" Ethan's voice came from somewhere ahead, muffled by the storm. "Get back inside." She ignored him. She found him by the fence, struggling to herd a panicked cow toward the barn. The animal was wild-eyed, bellowing, fighting him at every step. Lena moved to the other side and started pushing. "I told you to go back," Ethan shouted, "and I told you I could help." For a second she thought he might argue, but then another gust hit them, and the cow lurched sideways, and there was no time for anything but work. Together, they got the cow into the barn, then another, then another. By the time they finished, Lena couldn't feel her hands. Her face was numb, her coat was soaked through, and her legs felt like they might give out. But the cattle were safe. Ethan barred the barn door and turned to look at her. Snow clung to his beard, his hair, his eyelashes. He looked half frozen. "You should have stayed inside," he said. "Huh?" He said, "You would have lost them all." "That's not your problem." "Yes," Lena said, her voice shaking from cold and exhaustion. "It is." Ethan stared at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, something in his face softened. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get you warm." They stumbled back to the cabin together, and Ethan built the fire up until it roared. Lena sat as close as she dared, her teeth chattering, while he made coffee so strong it tasted like tar. He handed her a cup and sat down across from her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan said, "Why'd you come here?" Lena looked up. "What?" "You heard me. Why'd you come?" She wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her frozen fingers. "Because I didn't have anywhere else to go." "That's not an answer." "Yes, it is." Ethan shook his head. "There's 100 places easier than this. You could have gone to Denver, Salt Lake, California. But you came here?" He paused. "Why?" Lena looked into the fire. "Because the other places wouldn't have been mine. This isn't yours either." "It could be." She met his eyes. "If I stay." Ethan didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. And that night, when the storm finally died and the stars came out sharp and cold above the mountain, Lena lay in her narrow bed and thought about the way he'd looked at her. Like maybe, just maybe, he was starting to believe she might not leave. Spring came late to the mountain, and when it finally arrived, it didn't bring relief. It brought mud. The snow melted in thick, heavy sheets that turned the ground into a bog. The path to the barn became a river of freezing slush that came up past Lena's ankles. The roof leaked in 3 places, and they had to set out buckets to catch the drips. One of the cows got stuck in the mud near the spring, and it took both of them 2 hours to dig her out. But the worst part wasn't the mud or the leaks or the backbreaking work of trying to keep everything from falling apart. The worst part was the silence. Ethan had gone quiet again. Not the normal quiet, the working quiet, the tired quiet, but something else. Something that felt like a wall going up between them. Lena noticed it first at breakfast. He'd stopped looking at her when he spoke. Started eating faster, like he wanted to get away from the table. When she asked him a question, his answers came clipped and short, and sometimes he didn't answer at all. She told herself it didn't matter, told herself she hadn't come here for conversation. But it did matter. Because for 3 weeks after the storm, things had been different, better. They'd worked side by side without the constant tension, without Ethan watching her like she was about to disappear. They'd started eating meals together. He'd even smiled once, just a brief flash when she'd made a joke about the chickens. But it had been real. Now that was gone. and Lena didn't know why. It was a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks into her stay, when she finally confronted him about it. They were mending fence on the eastern pasture, replacing posts that had rotted through over the winter. Ethan worked with his back to her, his movements sharp and angry, driving the new posts into the ground like he was trying to punish them. Lena held the post steady while he hammered. "Did I do something wrong?" "No." "Then why won't you talk to me?" "I'm talking to you right now. You know what I mean." Ethan swung the hammer harder. "I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to tell me what changed." He stopped mid-swing and turned to look at her. His face was hard, his jaw tight. "Nothing changed. You're lying." "Lena, you've barely said 10 words to me in a week. You won't look at me during meals. You leave the cabin every night like you can't stand to be in the same room." She let go of the post and stepped back. "If you want me gone, just say it." "I don't want you gone." "Then what do you want?" Ethan threw the hammer down. It hit the mud with a wet thud. "I want you to stop acting like you're going to stay." Lena stared at him. "What?" "You heard me." He turned away, his hands gripping the fence rail so hard his knuckles went white. "I've seen this before. You settle in, you get comfortable, you start thinking maybe this place isn't so bad. And then winter comes back, or the work gets too hard, or you just wake up one day and realize you made a mistake." His voice dropped. "And then you leave." "I'm not going to leave." "You don't know that." "Yes," Lena said, her voice shaking. "I do." Ethan turned around. "How? How can you possibly know that?" "Because I chose this." She took a step toward him. "I didn't end up here by accident. I didn't come because I had no other options. I came because I wanted a life that was real, even if it was hard, even if it hurt." She paused. "I came because I wanted to build something that mattered." "With me?" The question hung in the air between them. Lena met his eyes. "Yes." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "You say that now, but you don't know what you're asking for." "Then tell me." "I already did, the first day you got here." "No." Lena's voice was firm. "You told me about the mountain. You told me about the work. You didn't tell me about you." Ethan's expression shifted. Something like pain crossed his face, quick and sharp. "There's nothing to tell." "That's not true." "Lena, why did the others leave, Mom?" she asked quietly. "The real reason." He didn't answer. Was it the mountain or was it you? Ethan turned away again, his shoulders tight. For a moment, Lena thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he spoke, his voice so low she almost didn't hear it. "Both." Lena waited. "The first one," he said slowly. "Her name was Catherine. She lasted 6 weeks. Left in the middle of the night, took the horse, rode down to Laramie and got on the first train east." He paused. "Didn't even leave a note. What happened?" "I don't know. One day she was fine, the next she was gone." He picked up a piece of broken fence and turned it over in his hands. "The second one, Margaret, she lasted 3 weeks. Said the isolation was driving her crazy. Said she couldn't stand the quiet." "And the others?" "Different reasons, same result." He threw the piece of wood down. "After the 5th one left, I stopped trying to figure out why. After the 8th, I stopped caring." Lena took another step closer. "What about me? What about you? Do you want me to stay? Or are you just waiting for me to leave so you can say you were right?" Ethan turned to face her. His eyes were dark, guarded. "I don't know. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got." They stood there in the mud, the wind pulling at their clothes, and Lena realized something she should have seen weeks ago. Ethan wasn't pushing her away because he didn't care. He was pushing her away because he did. "I'm not them," she said quietly. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." She moved closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face, the lines around his eyes. "I know you don't believe me. I know you think I'm going to wake up one day and realize this was a mistake, but I'm not." She paused. "I'm staying, Ethan, whether you want me to or not." For a long moment, He didn't move. Then, slowly, some of the tension left his shoulders. "All right," he said finally. "All right? All right?" He picked up the hammer. "Now help me finish this fence before the cattle break through again." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close to one. But it was enough. They worked in silence for the rest of the morning, but it was a different kind of silence, the kind that didn't need filling. And when they walked back to the cabin for lunch, Ethan didn't walk ahead of her. He walked beside her. 2 days later, the wolves came. Lena woke to the sound of the cattle screaming. She was out of bed before she fully registered what she was hearing, her hands fumbling in the dark for her boots. By the time she made it to the main room, Ethan was already at the door, rifle in hand. "Stay inside," he said. "Like hell I will. Lena, you can't handle a pack alone." He stared at her for half a second, then swore under his breath and shoved a second rifle into her hands. "You know how to use this?" "I'll figure it out." They ran. The barn was chaos. The cattle were wild-eyed, bellowing, slamming against the stalls. And outside, in the gray pre-dawn light, Lena could see them. Wolves. 5 of them, maybe 6, circling the barn like they were testing for weaknesses. They were lean and gray, their eyes bright in the half-light, and they moved with a coordination that made Lena's stomach turn. Ethan fired a shot into the air. The sound cracked across the ridge, sharp and loud, and the wolves scattered, but they didn't leave. "They're after the cattle," Ethan said. "They can smell blood." "Blood?" He pointed. One of the cows, the roan, the one Lena had milked that first morning, was down in the mud, thrashing. There was a gash along her flank, deep and bleeding. "They got her during the night," Ethan said. "Must have broken through the fence. Can we save her?" "Not if they come back." The wolves were regrouping. Lena could see them in the trees, watching, waiting. "What do we do?" she asked. Ethan's jaw tightened. "We make them think we're not worth the fight." He fired again, this time closer. One of the wolves yelped and bolted. The others hesitated. "Your turn," Ethan said. Lena raised the rifle. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them steady. She aimed high into the trees and pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her over. Her shoulder exploded with pain, and her ears rang so loud she couldn't hear anything else. But the wolves ran. For a moment, everything was still. Then Ethan was moving, running to the downed cow. Lena followed, her legs weak, her heart hammering. The cow was still alive, but barely. Her breathing came in short, ragged gasps, and the blood was pooling fast in the mud. "We need to get her inside," Ethan said. "Can she walk?" No. They tried anyway. Ethan got behind her, pushing, while Lena pulled from the front. The cow fought them, thrashing and bellowing, and every movement opened the wound wider. It took them 20 minutes to move her 10 feet. By the time they got her into the barn, Lena's arms were shaking and her coat was soaked with blood. Ethan grabbed a lantern and knelt beside the cow. He pressed his hand against the wound, trying to slow the bleeding, but it was too deep, too much. "Get me cloth," he said. "Anything clean." Lena ran back to the cabin and tore through her trunk, grabbing the extra dress she'd been saving. She ran back and handed it to Ethan. He didn't hesitate. He ripped the dress into strips and started packing the wound. The cow was fading. Lena could see it in her eyes, the fight going out of her. "Come on," Ethan muttered. "Come on." But the bleeding wouldn't stop. Lena knelt beside him. "Ethan, I know. There's nothing else we can do." He didn't answer. He just kept pressing the cloth against the wound, his hands covered in blood, his face hard. The cow took one last shuddering breath, and then she was gone. Ethan sat back on his heels. He didn't say anything, didn't move. Lena reached out and put her hand on his shoulder. He flinched. "Don't," he said. "Ethan, just don't." He stood up and walked out of the barn. Lena stayed with the cow for a while, her hand resting on the animal's still warm side. She didn't cry. She was too tired, too numb, but she felt the weight of it, the loss. When she finally went back to the cabin, Ethan was sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. She sat down across from him. "I'm sorry," she said. "It's not your fault." "I know, but I'm still sorry." He didn't answer. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Ethan said, "That was the best cow I had." I know. She was going to calve next month. I know. He looked at her. We can't afford to lose another one. Then we won't. Ethan almost laughed. You say that like we have a choice. We do, Lena said. We build a better fence. We keep watch at night. We make it so the wolves can't get in. That'll take time. Then we take the time. Ethan stared at her. You really believe that? Yes. He shook his head slowly. You're either the stubbornest woman I've ever met or the craziest. Probably both. This time he did laugh. Just a short, rough sound, but real. And for the first time since the wolves came, Lena felt like maybe they were going to be okay. They spent the next 3 days rebuilding the fence. Ethan worked like a man possessed, driving posts into the ground until his hands bled. Lena matched him, her own hands raw and blistered, her back screaming with every lift. They worked through rain, through cold, through exhaustion so deep Lena could barely stand, but they got it done. The new fence was higher, stronger, with wire strung so tight it hummed in the wind. They reinforced the barn door and added a second latch, and every night one of them kept watch. The wolves came back twice. The first time, Ethan scared them off with a single shot. The second time, Lena did. After that, they stopped coming, but the damage was done. They'd lost the cow and with her, the calf she'd been carrying. That was 2 animals they'd counted on for next year's stock, 2 animals they couldn't replace. Ethan didn't talk about it, but Lena could see the worry in his face every time he counted the remaining cattle. One night, after a dinner of boiled potatoes and nothing else, Lena asked, "How bad is it?" Ethan looked up. "What?" "The money. How bad is it?" He set down his fork. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I live here too. Because if we're going to make this work, I need to know what we're working with." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "We've got enough to make it through summer, maybe fall, if we're careful. And after that? After that, we need to sell cattle, but we don't have enough to sell without losing the herd." He paused. "We're one bad winter away from losing everything." Lena's stomach tightened. "What about selling something else? Timber, furs?" "Timber's worthless, too hard to haul down the mountain, and there aren't enough animals up here to make trapping worth it." He shook his head. "This land's good for one thing, cattle, and we don't have enough of them." Lena thought for a moment. "What if we got a loan?" "From who? No bank's going to lend to a homesteader who's barely breaking even." "What about the land company, the one in Laramie?" Ethan's expression darkened. "No." "Why not?" "Because I don't trust them." "You don't have to trust them. You just have to use them." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" Ethan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Because I've seen what happens when people take money from land companies. They can't pay it back, and the company takes everything. The land, the stock, the house, everything. Then we'll make sure we can pay it back." "How?" His voice rose. "We can barely feed ourselves. How are we supposed to pay back a loan?" "I don't know yet," Lena said quietly. "But we'll figure it out." Ethan stared at her. "You really think it's that easy?" "No, but I think it's the only option we've got." He turned away, his hands gripping the edge of the table. For a long time, he didn't say anything. Then finally, "I'll think about it." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. 3 days later, a rider came up the mountain. Lena saw him first. She was outside hanging laundry when she spotted the horse picking its way through the mud, a man in a dark coat sitting straight-backed in the saddle. "Ethan!" she called. He came out of the barn, rifle in hand, and stopped when he saw the rider. "You expecting someone?" Lena asked. "No." They waited. The man rode up slowly, his eyes sweeping over the cabin, the barn, the fence. When he stopped, he tipped his hat. "Morning," he said. His voice was smooth, polished. "I'm looking for Ethan Cross." "You found him," Ethan said. "What do you want?" The man smiled. "Name's William Greer. I represent the Rocky Mountain Land Development Company." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. I'm here about your water rights. Ethan's face went hard. What about them? Well, Mr. Cross, it's come to our attention that the spring you've been using for your stock, the one about half a mile east of here, is actually on land owned by our company. That's a lie. I'm afraid it's not. Greer unfolded the paper and held it out. According to the territorial survey conducted last fall, the boundary runs right through the middle of your eastern pasture. The spring falls on our side. Ethan didn't take the paper. I've been using that spring for 6 years. Nobody said a word about it. That's because the previous owner didn't care, but the company's bought out his claim, and we're enforcing all property rights. Greer smiled again. It didn't reach his eyes. Of course, we're willing to work with you. How much? I'm sorry? How much do you want? Greer folded the paper back up. $50 a year. Lena felt the air leave her lungs. Ethan's voice was ice. That's robbery. That's business, Mr. Cross. You're using our water. We're asking for fair compensation. Fair compensation would be $5, maybe $10. $50, Greer said firmly. Payable in advance, starting next month. And if I don't pay? Then we'll be forced to restrict your access to the spring. You'll have to find another water source. He glanced around. Though I imagine that would be difficult, given your location. Ethan took a step forward. Get off my land. Greer didn't move. I'm just the messenger, Mr. Cross. The company's offer is on the table. You've got 30 days to decide. He turned his horse. I'd think carefully if I were you. Water's hard to come by on this mountain. He rode away without looking back. Lena and Ethan stood in the mud and watched him go. When he was out of sight, Ethan threw the rifle down and swore, long and loud, and with enough anger to make the air shake. Lena waited until he was done. Can they do that? She asked. Legally? If the survey's real, yes. Is it? I don't know, maybe. He ran a hand through his hair. It doesn't matter. Even if it's fake, we can't afford to fight it. A lawyer would cost more than we have. What about the spring? Can we find another one? Not within 5 miles, and even if we could, we don't have the equipment to dig a well. He picked up the rifle. They've got us cornered. Lena's mind was racing. How much do we have saved? $32. That's not enough. I know. So what do we do? Ethan looked at her. I don't know. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked defeated, and that scared her more than anything. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every option she could think of. They could sell the cattle, but that would leave them with nothing to build on. They could take a loan, but Ethan was right. No bank would lend to them. They could leave, find another homestead, start over somewhere else. But Lena didn't want to leave. She'd worked too hard, come too far. This place was hers now, hers and Ethan's. She wasn't going to let some land company take it away. She got out of bed and walked into the main room. Ethan was still awake, sitting by the fire, a half-empty bottle beside him. He looked up when she came in. Can't sleep? No. Me neither. She sat down across from him. I've been thinking. About what? About the land company. About the money. She paused. About my inheritance. Ethan frowned. What inheritance? Lena took a breath. She hadn't told him about this. Hadn't told anyone. Before I came here, she said slowly, I had a life in Philadelphia. My father owned a textile mill. When he died, he left me a share of the business. Ethan's eyes narrowed. How much? Enough. How much, Lena? $200, maybe more. She met his gaze. I sold my share before I left. Put the money in a bank in Laramie. Ethan stared at her. You've had $200 this whole time? Yes. And you didn't say anything? Because it wasn't relevant. Not relevant. His voice rose. We're about to lose everything, and you didn't think to mention you had enough money to save us? It's not our money, Lena said quietly. It's mine. The words hung in the air. Ethan's face went cold. Right. Yours. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Lena stood up. I meant that I didn't come here to buy my way in. I came to build something, to earn it. She paused. But if we need the money to survive, I'll use it. For the water rights? No. Her voice was firm. For something better. Ethan looked at her. Like what? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. She turned toward her room. I'm going to Laramie. When? Tomorrow. Lena. I'll be back in a week, maybe less. She stopped at the door. Trust me. And before he could argue, she walked away. Ethan didn't try to stop her. He stood in the doorway the next morning, watching as Lena loaded her bag onto the wagon Hutchins had agreed to bring up for $20 they barely had. The sun wasn't up yet, and the air was cold enough that their breath came out in white clouds. You don't have to do this, he said. Lena pulled the straps tight on her bag. Yes, I do. It's your money. You can spend it however you want. I know. She turned to face him. That's why I'm doing this. Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just stood there, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders tense. Lena climbed up onto the wagon bench. Hutchins was already there, reins in hand, looking like he wanted to be anywhere but in the middle of whatever this was. I'll be back in a week, Lena said. And if you're not? She met his eyes. I will be. Hutchins clicked his tongue and the wagon lurched forward. Lena kept her gaze on Ethan until the trees swallowed him up, and even then she could feel the weight of his doubt pressing against her back. The ride down the mountain took 6 hours. 6 hours of ruts and rocks, and Hutchins making small talk she didn't have the energy to return. By the time they rolled into Laramie, the sun was high and hot, and Lena's entire body ached from being jostled around. Where to? Hutchins asked. First National Bank. He raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. Just drove her to the squat brick building on 2nd Street and waited while she climbed down. Inside, the bank was cool and quiet. A man in a pressed suit sat behind a desk near the window, scratching numbers into a ledger. He looked up when Lena walked in, and his eyes did a quick sweep, muddy boots, worn coat, hair that hadn't seen a brush in days. Can I help you? His tone suggested he didn't think he could. I need to access my account, Lena said. Name? Lena Voss. He flipped through a separate ledger, his finger trailing down a list of names. When he found hers, he paused. You have $243 on deposit. I know. I need to withdraw it. The man looked up. All of it? Yes. That's a significant amount to carry. Are you sure? I'm sure. He studied her for another moment, then nodded. I'll need to see identification. Lena pulled out the papers she'd kept folded in her bag since Philadelphia. The deed to her father's mill, her birth certificate, a letter from the bank manager who'd helped her set up the account. The man examined each one carefully, then disappeared into a back room. He returned 5 minutes later with a locked box. He counted out the money in front of her, bills and coins, more cash than Lena had seen in one place in years. When he was done, he slid it across the desk. Sign here, Lena signed. Then she scooped the money into her bag and walked out before he could ask any more questions. Hutchins was still waiting. You get what you needed? Yes. Where to now? Lena thought for a moment. She could go back to the mountain, give Ethan the money, pay off the land company, and hope that bought them enough time to figure out the rest. But that wouldn't solve the problem. It would just delay it. No. If she was going to use this money, she was going to use it right. Take me to the land office, she said. Hutchins frowned. What for? I need to look at some maps. The land office was a cramped building that smelled like dust and old paper. A clerk sat behind a counter, half asleep, a newspaper spread out in front of him. Lena cleared her throat. The clerk looked up, annoyed. Help you? I need to see the territorial survey for the ridge north of here. The Cross Homestead. That'll cost you 50 cents. Lena put the coins on the counter. The clerk sighed, pushed himself to his feet, and disappeared into a maze of filing cabinets. He came back 10 minutes later with a rolled map so old the edges were crumbling. He spread it out on the counter. This what you're looking for? Lena leaned in. The map was hand-drawn, the lines faint and smudged. She traced the boundary markers with her finger, following the ridge east until she found the spring. There it was, a small circle marked with the word water in faded ink, and the boundary line ran right through it, or at least that's what it looked like. Lena squinted. The line was uneven, wavering in places like whoever drew it had been in a hurry, and near the spring there was a smudge, like someone had erased something and drawn over it. "Can I get a copy of this?" she asked. "Cost you another $1." "Fine." The clerk made the copy by tracing the original onto a fresh sheet of paper. It took him 20 minutes, and the result was barely legible, but Lena didn't care. She folded it carefully and tucked it into her bag. "You need anything else?" the clerk asked. "Yes." "Who conducted this survey?" The clerk checked the corner of the map. "Company called Rocky Mountain Land Development. Same outfit that's been buying up claims all over the territory." Lena's stomach tightened. They surveyed their own land? Happens all the time, cheaper than hiring a government crew. And nobody checks their work? The clerk shrugged. Not unless someone files a dispute, and most folks can't afford to. Lena thanked him and left. Outside, the sun was starting to dip. She had maybe 2 hours of daylight left, and she still had one more stop to make. The law office of Samuel Pritchard was located above a dry goods store on the edge of town. Lena climbed the narrow stairs and knocked. "Come in," a voice called. The office was small, cluttered with books and papers stacked so high they looked ready to topple. A man sat behind a desk that was more chaos than furniture. Mid-50s, balding, with ink stains on his fingers and a pair of spectacles perched on the end of his nose. He looked up when Lena entered. "You hear about a claim?" "Not exactly." Lena closed the door behind her. "I need a lawyer." Pritchard leaned back in his chair. "What kind of trouble you in?" "The kind that involves a land company trying to steal my water." He raised an eyebrow. "Rocky Mountain?" "How'd you know?" "Because they've done it to half a dozen homesteaders in the last year." He gestured to a chair. "Sit down. Tell me what happened." Lena sat, and she told him everything: the spring, the survey, William Greer, and his $50 demand. When she was done, Pritchard was quiet for a long moment. "You got the map?" he asked finally. Lena pulled it out and spread it on the desk. Pritchard studied it, his eyes narrowing. "See that smudge?" Lena pointed. "Right near the spring?" "I see it. Looks like someone changed the boundary." "Maybe. Maybe not. Hard to prove without the original survey notes." Pritchard looked up. "You got money for a lawsuit?" "How much?" "Court fees, filing costs, my fee. You're looking at $100 minimum, and that's if we win fast. If it drags out, could be double." Lena's heart sank. That would take almost everything she had. "What are my chances?" she asked. Pritchard leaned back again, thinking. "If the survey's fraudulent, decent. If it's legit, none. Problem is, we won't know until we dig into the company's records, and they're not going to hand those over willingly. So we force them. That's what a lawsuit does, but it takes time, months, maybe longer. We don't have months. Then you're out of luck." He started to roll the map back up. "My advice? Pay the $50 and move on." "No." Pritchard paused. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Lena leaned forward. "I'm not paying them a dime. That spring is on our land, and I'm going to prove it. And how exactly do you plan to do that?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." She stood. "If I bring you proof, real proof, will you take the case?" Pritchard studied her. "Depends on the proof." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." He handed the map back. "You seem like a smart woman, Miss Voss. Smart enough to know when you're beat." "I'm not beat. Not yet. But you will be." He picked up his pen. "Rocky Mountain doesn't lose. They've got money, lawyers, connections. You've got what? A homestead and a grudge?" Lena met his eyes. "I've got something they don't." "What's that?" "I've got nothing left to lose." She walked out before he could respond. Outside, the sun was almost down. Lena stood on the sidewalk, her bag heavy against her shoulder, and tried to figure out what the hell she was going to do next. She had the map. She had the money. But she didn't have proof, and without it, Pritchard was right. She was beat. Unless an idea started forming in the back of her mind. Risky. Probably stupid. But it might work. She found Hutchins at the livery stable feeding his horses. "I need one more favor," she said. He looked at her warily. "What kind of favor?" "I need you to take me to the Rocky Mountain Land Development Office." "Now?" "Now. It's almost dark." "I know." Hutchins sighed. "You're going to get us both in trouble." "Probably." He shook his head but grabbed his coat. "Where is it?" 3rd Street, the big building with the sign out front. They rode through town in silence. When they reached the building, Lena told Hutchins to wait. "How long?" he asked. "As long as it takes." The building was 3 stories, brick, with tall windows and a front door made of heavy oak. Lena tried the handle. Locked. She walked around to the side. There was a smaller door there, half hidden behind a stack of crates. She tried that one too, also locked. She looked up. On the 2nd floor, one of the windows was open, just a crack, but enough. Lena glanced back at the street. Empty. She took a breath and started climbing. The crates made a decent ladder. She pulled herself up onto the 1st stack, then the 2nd, her hand scraping against the rough wood. When she reached the window, she pushed it open and squeezed through. Inside, the office was dark and quiet. Lena waited for her eyes to adjust, then started moving. The main floor was all desks and filing cabinets. She tried the 1st cabinet, locked. The 2nd, also locked. The 3rd opened with a soft click. She pulled out the 1st file. Land deeds. She put it back and tried the next drawer. Survey notes. Lena's pulse quickened. She pulled out the folder and opened it. There were dozens of surveys inside, each one labeled with a homestead name and a date. She flipped through them until she found the one marked Cross. She pulled it out and held it up to the window, using the moonlight to read. The survey was dated 6 months ago. The notes were scrawled in tight, cramped handwriting, but Lena could make out enough to understand what she was looking at. The original boundary line ran west of the spring, a full 100 yards west, and someone had crossed it out and drawn a new line, right through the middle of the water source. Lena's hands started shaking. This was it. This was the proof. She folded the paper and shoved it into her coat. Then she heard footsteps. Heavy. Coming from the stairs. Lena froze. The footsteps got closer. A door opened somewhere below her. A voice called out, gruff, male. "Anyone up there?" Lena didn't breathe. The footsteps started up the stairs. She looked around wildly. The window was too far. The door was too exposed. There was nowhere to hide except she dove under the nearest desk, pulling her legs in tight just as the door to the office swung open. Light flooded the room. Lena pressed herself against the back of the desk, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. The man walked in. She could see his boots, scuffed leather, mud on the heels. He moved slowly, checking the cabinets, the desks. He stopped right in front of her hiding spot. Lena held her breath. The man stood there for what felt like an eternity. Then he muttered something under his breath and walked away. The door closed. The footsteps faded. Lena waited another full minute before she moved. When she finally crawled out from under the desk, her legs were shaking so bad she almost couldn't stand. She made it to the window, climbed back out, and dropped to the ground harder than she meant to. Pain shot through her ankle, but she ignored it. Hutchins was waiting where she'd left him. His eyes went wide when he saw her. What the hell happened? Drive, Lena said, limping toward the wagon. What? Drive. Now. Hutchins didn't argue. He snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward. They were 2 blocks away before Lena finally let herself breathe. You steal something? Hutchins asked. No. Lena pulled the survey notes from her coat. I took back what was mine. Her ankle was throbbing now, swelling inside her boot. She'd definitely twisted it in the fall, maybe worse. You need a doctor, Hutchins said, glancing at the way she was favoring her left leg. I need to get back to the mountain. Not tonight, you don't. Sun's down, and the road's dangerous in the dark. We'll stay at the boarding house and leave at first light. Lena wanted to argue, but the pain was making her dizzy. Fine. They found the same boarding house from before. The landlady took one look at Lena's ankle and brought ice wrapped in cloth. "What did you do to yourself?" she asked. "Fell," Lena said. The woman didn't look convinced but didn't press. "Keep that elevated and don't put weight on it for at least a day." After she left, Lena sat on the bed and unwrapped her ankle to look at it. Purple and swollen, twice its normal size. She rewrapped the ice and lay back, staring at the ceiling. The survey notes were tucked safely in her bag. Tomorrow she'd show them to Pritchard. Tomorrow they'd file the lawsuit. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight, all she could think about was Ethan. Whether he was sleeping or staying up worrying, whether he believed she was coming back, whether he'd forgive her for taking this risk. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but the pain kept her awake most of the night. When dawn finally came, Lena limped downstairs to find Hutchins already loading the wagon. "You sure you can make the trip?" he asked, eyeing her ankle. "I don't have a choice." The ride back up the mountain was agony. Every rut and rock sent pain shooting up her leg. By the time they reached the homestead, Lena was biting her lip hard enough to draw blood. Ethan was waiting on the porch. He looked like he hadn't slept. He stood when the wagon stopped. "You're back." "I'm back." His eyes went to her ankle. "What happened?" "I'll explain inside." He helped her down from the wagon, and Lena couldn't hide the wince when she put weight on her foot. "Lena, I'm fine." "You're not fine. You can barely walk." He scooped her up before she could protest and carried her into the cabin. He set her down on the bed and immediately started unwrapping her ankle. When he saw how swollen it was, his face went pale. "What did you do?" "I got the proof we need." She pulled out the survey notes and handed them to him. Ethan took the paper and read it. His expression shifted, confusion, then understanding, then something close to fury. "This is fraud," he said quietly. "Yes." "Where did you get this?" Lena met his eyes. "From their office, second floor, filing cabinet. You broke in." "Yes." "And you hurt yourself doing it." "Yes." Ethan set the paper down carefully, like he was afraid if he moved too fast he might break something. Then he turned to look at her. "You could have been caught. You could have been arrested. You could have—" He stopped. "Do you have any idea how reckless that was?" "I know exactly how reckless it was. I did it anyway." "Why?" "Because we're running out of time. Because waiting wasn't going to solve anything. Because someone had to do something." She paused. "Because I couldn't stand the thought of losing this place." Ethan's anger seemed to drain out of him all at once. He sat down on the edge of the bed, his shoulders sagging. "You're the most stubborn, hard-headed, impossible woman I've ever met," he said. "I know. And if you ever do something that's stupid again, I'm going to—" He stopped. "I don't know what I'm going to do, but it won't be good." "Noted." He looked at her ankle again. "This needs to be seen by a doctor." "It's just a sprain." "It could be broken." "It's not." "How do you know?" "Because I can move it. See?" She flexed her foot and immediately regretted it. The pain was blinding. Ethan caught her hand. "Stop. Just stop." His voice was rough. "Let me help you." Over the next 2 days, Ethan barely left her side. He brought her food, changed the ice on her ankle, helped her to the outhouse when she couldn't put it off any longer. He didn't mention the survey notes. Didn't ask what she planned to do next. But on the third morning, when Lena's ankle was finally well enough to walk on with a crutch Ethan had fashioned from an old broom handle, he sat down at the table and said, "We need to go back to Laramie." "I know. Can you make the trip?" "I'll manage." They left that afternoon. The ride down was slower this time, Ethan making Hutchins stop every hour so Lena could rest her ankle. When they reached Pritchard's office, the lawyer took one look at Lena hobbling in on her crutch and raised an eyebrow. "Rough week?" he asked. "You could say that." Lena pulled out the survey notes and set them on his desk. "I got your proof." Pritchard picked up the paper and read it. Then he read it again. When he looked up, his expression was different, sharper. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "Does it matter?" "It does if we're going to use it in court. A judge won't accept evidence obtained illegally." "Then we don't tell the judge where it came from. We just use it to know what we're looking for when we subpoena their records. Pritchard studied her for a long moment. You've been thinking about this. I've had nothing but time to think. He tapped the paper. If we file a lawsuit, I can force them to produce all their survey documents. If these notes exist in their official files, and they should, because companies are required to keep records, then we can use those. And if they've destroyed them, then we've got a problem. But based on what I've seen of Rocky Mountain, they're arrogant. They probably never thought anyone would challenge them hard enough to get to their records. Ethan leaned forward. So what's the next step? I draft the complaint, we file it, and then we wait for their response. Pritchard looked at Lena. This is going to get ugly. They're going to fight back hard. Let them fight. You sure about this? Because once we start, there's no backing out. Lena looked at Ethan. He nodded. We're sure, she said. Pritchard pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Then let's get to work. The lawsuit was filed 3 days later. The response came in less than a week. Rocky Mountain Land Development wasn't just fighting back, they were going nuclear. They filed a countersuit claiming Ethan had illegally diverted water from their property. They demanded restitution, $500, and they put a lien on the homestead. Pritchard brought the papers to the cabin himself. He looked grim. They're trying to bury you, he said bluntly. This countersuit is designed to drain your resources before we even get to trial. Can they do that? Lena asked. They just did. Pritchard set the papers on the table. You've got 2 choices, settle or fight. If you settle, you'll pay the $50 a year and drop the lawsuit. If you fight, you're risking everything. Ethan looked at Lena. What do you think? Lena picked up the papers and read them. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. $500. A lien on the land. If they lost, they'd lose everything. But if they won, we fight, she said. Ethan didn't hesitate. Agreed. Pritchard nodded slowly. Then we'd better make damn sure we win. He pulled out another set of papers. I'm filing a motion to compel discovery. That means Rocky Mountain has to turn over all their survey records, correspondence, anything related to boundary determinations in this area. Will the judge grant it? Lena asked. If I argue it right, yes. Judge Hastings doesn't like companies that play games. He paused. But it's going to take time. And while we're waiting, that lien stands. Which means if you default on any debts, they can take the land. We don't have any debts, Ethan said. Then don't take on any, and pray nothing goes wrong. Over the next 3 weeks, Pritchard filed motion after motion. Rocky Mountain fought every single one. They claimed the records were proprietary. They claimed turning them over would compromise their business operations. They claimed the lawsuit was frivolous. Judge Hastings wasn't buying it. Mr. Greer, she said during one hearing, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, if your company has nothing to hide, you should have no problem producing these documents. Unless you're suggesting that your survey practices can't withstand scrutiny? Greer's lawyer stood. Your Honor, we simply need more time to compile. You've had 3 weeks. That's plenty of time. She banged her gavel. Motion granted. Rocky Mountain Land Development is ordered to produce all requested documents within 10 days or face contempt charges. The courtroom buzzed. Lena sat beside Ethan, barely daring to breathe. They'd won the first round, but the fight was just beginning. The documents arrived 9 days later, boxes of them, delivered to Pritchard's office by a courier who looked annoyed at having to haul them up the stairs. Pritchard spent 2 days going through everything. Then he called Lena and Ethan to his office. Sit down, he said. They sat. Pritchard spread out a series of documents across his desk. I found something. What? Lena leaned forward. These are the original survey notes for 30 different homesteads, and every single one shows the same pattern. He pointed to the papers. Original boundary lines that put water sources on homestead property, and then amended lines that move those boundaries to put the water on Rocky Mountain's side. Ethan picked up one of the documents. They did this to everyone? Everyone in this region, yes. It's systematic fraud. Lena's heart was pounding. Can we use this? We can do better than use it. We can turn this into a class action lawsuit. Pritchard looked at her. If we can get the other homesteaders to join, we're not just fighting for your water. We're fighting for all of them. How many homesteaders? Ethan asked. 29, not counting you. And they'd all have to agree to join the lawsuit? Not all of them, but the more we have, the stronger the case. Pritchard leaned back. I can reach out to them. See who's willing to fight. Lena stood up. No, let me do it. Lena, they don't know you, but some of them might remember me from before. And if they don't, I'll make them listen. She looked at Ethan. We should go together. He nodded. When do we start? Tomorrow. They spent the next 2 weeks tracking down every homesteader on Pritchard's list. Some had moved away, unable to keep up with Rocky Mountain's fees. Some had sold their land for pennies. Some were barely hanging on. But every single one of them had a story. The first homesteader they found was a man named James Holloway. He lived 15 miles outside Laramie in a cabin that looked like it might collapse in the next strong wind. When Lena explained what they were doing, he just shook his head. I already lost my land, he said. What's the point? The point is making sure they can't do it to anyone else. I can't afford a lawyer. You won't have to. It's a class action. We all share the costs. Holloway looked at his empty fields. What if we lose? Then we're no worse off than we are now. But if we win, Rocky Mountain pays restitution. You could get your land back. He thought about it for a long time. Then he nodded. All right, count me in. The second homesteader was a widow named Margaret Porter. She'd lost her husband the previous winter and had been trying to hold on to their claim alone. When Lena told her about the lawsuit, Margaret started crying. I thought I was going crazy, she said. I thought I'd misremembered where the boundary was. You didn't misremember. They lied to you. Margaret signed the papers with shaking hands. By the end of 2 weeks, they had 23 homesteaders willing to join the lawsuit, 23 people ready to stand up and say enough. Pritchard filed the amended complaint on a Monday morning. The courtroom was packed for the hearing. Homesteaders filled the gallery. Some of them people Lena had met, some she hadn't. Reporters from newspapers in Laramie and Cheyenne sat in the front row, notebooks ready. And at the defense table, William Greer sat with 3 lawyers, all of them looking calm and confident, too confident. Judge Hastings called the court to order. Pritchard stood and laid out the case. He showed the original survey notes. He showed the altered versions. He brought in a surveyor who testified that the amended boundary lines were geographically impossible. Your Honor, Pritchard said, this isn't a case of one homesteader making a mistake. This is systematic fraud perpetrated by a company that saw vulnerable people and decided to exploit them. They altered official documents, they misrepresented property lines, and they extorted money from people who couldn't afford to fight back. He paused, letting the words sink in. The evidence is overwhelming, and it demands justice. The lead defense attorney stood. His name was Harold Blackwood, and he had a reputation for never losing. Your Honor, Blackwood said, his voice smooth, what Mr. Pritchard calls fraud is nothing more than corrections to survey errors. The original surveys were conducted hastily, without proper equipment. When Rocky Mountain acquired the land, they hired professional surveyors to correct those mistakes. Then why? Judge Hastings asked, did every single correction move water sources away from homestead property and onto your company's land? Blackwood didn't miss a beat. Coincidence, Your Honor. Water naturally flows according to geography, not property lines. That's not what the expert surveyor testified. With respect, Your Honor, one expert's opinion is more credible than your company's self-serving documents. Judge Hastings looked at the papers in front of her. I've read the evidence, Mr. Blackwood, and unless you can provide a compelling reason why I shouldn't believe what's right in front of me, I'm inclined to rule in favor of the plaintiffs. Blackwood's confidence flickered. Your Honor, we request a continuance to bring in our own expert witnesses. Denied. You've had ample time to prepare your defense. Your Honor, I said denied. She looked at the gallery, at all the homesteaders watching with desperate hope. This court will reconvene in 1 hour for my ruling. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Lena sat frozen, barely able to process what had just happened. 1 hour. In 1 hour, they'd know if everything they'd fought for had been worth it. Outside, the homesteaders gathered on the courthouse steps. Some were praying, some were pacing, some just stood in stunned silence. Ethan found Lena and took her hand. "You did this," he said quietly. "We did this." "No, you. If you hadn't gone to that office, if you hadn't gotten those notes, none of this would be happening." Lena squeezed his hand. "Let's wait to celebrate until we actually win." But when they filed back into the courtroom an hour later, Lena could see it in Judge Hastings' face. They'd won. The judge didn't waste time. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented," she said, "and I find the actions of Rocky Mountain Land Development to be fraudulent, exploitative, and unconscionable." The gallery erupted in cheers. Judge Hastings banged her gavel. "Order, I'm not finished." The room fell silent. "I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiffs in all 23 cases. Rocky Mountain is ordered to return all water rights to their rightful owners, remove all liens placed on homestead properties, and pay restitution in the amount of $300 per plaintiff for fees collected and damages incurred." More cheers. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I'm referring this case to the territorial attorney for criminal prosecution. The evidence suggests a pattern of fraud that goes beyond civil liability." She looked directly at William Greer. "Mr. Greer, I want to be very clear. Your company's actions have harmed dozens of families, destroyed livelihoods, and undermined the integrity of the territorial land system. If I had the authority, I would shut you down permanently. Since I don't, I'm doing the next best thing. I'm making sure everyone knows exactly what you've done." She banged her gavel one final time. "This court is adjourned." The courtroom exploded. People were crying, hugging, shouting. Lena felt hands on her shoulders, heard voices thanking her, but it all felt distant and surreal. They'd won. They'd actually won. Ethan pulled her into his arms, and Lena let herself collapse against him. "It's over," she whispered. "Yeah, he said. "It's over." But even as he said it, Lena knew it wasn't really over. The fight might be done, but the work of rebuilding was just beginning. And that work would be harder than anything they'd faced yet. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun felt different, brighter somehow. Or maybe that was just the weight lifting off Lena's shoulders, making everything look clearer. She stood on the steps while a crowd gathered around them, homesteaders, reporters, people she'd never met who'd heard about the case and come to watch. Everyone wanted to shake her hand, thank her, tell her their own stories of what Rocky Mountain had done to them. A reporter from the Laramie Boomerang pushed through the crowd. "Miss Voss, can I ask you a few questions?" "I'm not. Just a few minutes. People need to hear this story." Lena glanced at Ethan. He shrugged. The reporter pulled out a notebook. "What made you decide to take on Rocky Mountain? Most homesteaders just paid the fees." "Because it wasn't right," Lena said. "They were stealing from people who couldn't fight back. Someone had to stop them. And you weren't afraid?" "I was terrified. But being afraid didn't change what needed to be done." The reporter scribbled notes. "What do you say to other homesteaders who might be facing similar situations?" Lena thought about it. "I'd say don't give up. Don't let anyone make you believe you're powerless just because you don't have money or connections. If something's wrong, fight it, even if you're scared, especially if you're scared." "That's good, real good." The reporter flipped to a new page. "One more question. What's next for you and Mr. Cross?" "We go home," Lena said simply, "and we build the life we fought for." The reporter thanked her and disappeared into the crowd. Other reporters tried to push forward, but Ethan stepped between them and Lena. "That's enough," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but something in it made people step back. They found Pritchard near the courthouse doors, talking to a group of the other homesteaders. When he saw Lena and Ethan, he excused himself and walked over. "Congratulations," he said. "You just took down one of the biggest land companies in the territory." "We couldn't have done it without you," Lena said. "Maybe, but I've fought a lot of cases, Miss Voss. Most of my clients give up when things get hard. You didn't." He paused. "That made all the difference." "What happens now?" Ethan asked. "With Rocky Mountain?" "The criminal prosecution will take months, maybe a year, but the civil case is done. The restitution will be paid out within 6 weeks, and the liens will be removed immediately." Pritchard pulled out a document. "Speaking of which, this is the court order removing the lien on your property. You'll want to file it with the land office as soon as possible. Ethan took the paper like it might disappear if he held it too tight. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank your wife, was. Lena felt her face flush. We're not yet, maybe, but you should be. Pritchard tipped his hat. Good luck to both of you. He walked away before either of them could respond. Ethan looked at Lena. Did he just... Yeah. And did you... I heard it. They stood there for a moment, not quite looking at each other. Then Ethan said, We should probably get going. It's a long ride back. Right, yeah. But neither of them moved. Finally, Lena said, Ethan, I know. We'll talk about it later. He held out his hand. Come on, let's go home. She took his hand and they walked to where Hutchins was waiting with the wagon. The ride back to the mountain took most of the night. Lena dozed off somewhere around mile 12, her head resting against Ethan's shoulder. When she woke up, they were already climbing the ridge, the cabin barely visible in the pre-dawn light. Inside, everything looked exactly the same, but something felt different. Maybe it was knowing that the land was truly theirs now, that no one could take it away. Or maybe it was the way Ethan looked at her as he built up the fire, like he was seeing her for the first time and liking what he saw. You hungry? He asked. Starving. He made eggs and coffee, and they ate in comfortable silence. When they were done, Ethan stood and walked to the window. I've been thinking, he said. About what? About what Pritchard said. About us. Lena's heart started beating faster. What about it? Ethan turned to face her. We've been living together for 5 months. We've fought wolves, survived winter, taken on a land company. We've built this place together. He paused. Seems like we should make it official. Official how? You know how. Lena stood up slowly. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm not doing a very good job of it, am I? No, you're really not. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. I'm no good at this kind of thing. I don't have pretty words or a ring or any of the things a woman's supposed to get when a man proposes. He took a step toward her. But I know that I don't want to do this without you. Any of it. The homestead, the work, the life. I want you here. Not as a partner or a hired hand or whatever we've been pretending this is. As my wife. Lena felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. That might be the worst proposal I've ever heard. Is that a no? That's a yes, you idiot. Ethan's face broke into that wide, genuine smile. Yeah? Yeah. He crossed the room in 3 steps and kissed her. Not tentative this time. Not uncertain. Like a man who'd finally figured out what he wanted. When they broke apart, Lena was breathless. We should probably tell people, she said. What people? There's no one up here but us. Hutchins, Pritchard, the other homesteaders. They can wait. Ethan pulled her close again. Right now, I just want to enjoy this. They spent the rest of the morning making plans. They'd get married in Laramie. Small ceremony, just Pritchard and whoever else wanted to come. They'd use some of the restitution money to expand the cabin, build that second room Ethan had mentioned. We'll need more space eventually, he said. For what? He gave her a look. You know for what? Lena felt her face heat. We should probably get married first. Probably. They were still talking about logistics when someone knocked on the door. Ethan frowned. Who the hell? He opened the door to find Thomas Garrett standing on the porch, hat in hand. Mr. Cross, Miss Voss. Sorry to bother you, but I had to come thank you in person. You didn't have to do that, Lena said. Yes, I did. What you did, getting all of us together, fighting that company, it gave me my land back, my livelihood. He looked down at his hat. I was about ready to give up before you came along. Now I've got a reason to keep going. I'm glad we could help, Lena said. Garrett reached into his coat and pulled out a small package wrapped in cloth. Made you something. It's not much, but... He handed it to Ethan, who unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a wooden frame with 2 names carved into it. Ethan Cross and Lena Voss. For your cabin, Garrett said. So everyone knows whose place this is. Ethan stared at the frame. This is... Thank you. Thank you. Garrett put his hat back on. I'll let you get back to it. Just wanted to say my piece. After he left, Ethan hung the frame above the door. Looks good there, Lena said. Yeah, it does. Over the next few weeks, other homesteaders started coming by. Clara. Brennan brought a preserves. Margaret Porter brought blankets she'd sewn herself. James Holloway brought a side of venison. Heard you two are getting hitched, he said. Figured you could use some decent food for the celebration. Word was spreading faster than Lena had expected. By the time they made it back down to Laramie to file the marriage license, half the town seemed to know about it. The clerk at the courthouse raised an eyebrow when they walked in. You're the ones who took down Rocky Mountain. We had help, Lena said. Still, that took guts. He pulled out the forms. When's the ceremony? Saturday, Ethan said. You got a minister? They hadn't thought about that part. The clerk saw their expressions and laughed. Don't worry, Judge Hastings can do it. She's been marrying folks for years. They found Judge Hastings in her chambers going through a stack of case files. Mr. Cross, Miss Voss. She looked up. What can I do for you? We'd like to get married, Mossam, Lena said. And we were told you could perform the ceremony. The judge's stern expression softened slightly. I'd be honored. When? Saturday, if that works for you. Saturday's fine. Where? Here, Ethan suggested, unless there's somewhere better. Here works. 2 o'clock? 2 o'clock. Judge Hastings made a note in her calendar. You'll need 2 witnesses. We'll bring them. They left the courthouse and went straight to Pritchard's office. He looked up from his desk when they walked in. Let me guess. You need a witness. How'd you know? Lena asked. Because everyone who gets married by Judge Hastings needs witnesses, and you don't know enough people in town to have options. He stood. I'd be happy to stand up for you. Thank you, Ethan said. Don't thank me yet. I cry at weddings. They found their second witness at the boarding house, the landlady, a woman named Beatrice, who'd been kind to Lena during her previous stays. I'd love to, she said when Lena asked. And I'll make you a cake. No charge. You don't have to. Nonsense. A wedding needs a cake. Saturday came faster than Lena expected. She woke up that morning in the boarding house room alone because Beatrice had insisted it was bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the ceremony. Doesn't matter that you've been living together for months, Beatrice had said firmly. Tradition is tradition. Lena had a new dress, pale blue, simple but clean. Clara Brennan had brought it up to the mountain the week before. Every bride should have something new, Claire had said, even if it's just a dress. Lena put it on now, looking at herself in the small mirror above the wash basin. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the pale, uncertain girl who'd arrived in Wyoming 6 months ago. This woman had calluses on her hands and sun-weathered skin. She looked strong, capable. She looked like someone who belonged on that mountain. There was a knock at the door. You decent? Beatrice called. Come in. Beatrice entered carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. Picked these this morning. Figured you'd want something to hold. Lena took the flowers, her throat tight. Thank you. You nervous? A little. That's normal, but you're doing the right thing. That man loves you something fierce. How can you tell? Because he looks at you like you hung the moon. And because he waited outside this boarding house until midnight last night just to make sure you were safe. Beatrice smiled. That's a good man, Lena. Don't let him go. I won't. The courthouse was surprisingly crowded when they arrived. Word had spread about the wedding, and it seemed like half the homesteaders from the lawsuit had shown up. They filled the hallway outside Judge Hastings' chambers, talking in low voices. When Lena walked in with Beatrice, everyone stopped talking. Then they started clapping. Lena felt her face go red. You didn't have to come. Are you kidding? Margaret Porter said. You gave us our lives back. The least we can do is witness you starting yours. Thomas Garrett stepped forward and handed Lena a small package. From all of us. Open it later. Lena took the package, too overwhelmed to speak. Beatrice steered her toward Judge Hastings' chambers. Come on, let's get you married before you cry and ruin your face. Inside the chambers, Ethan was waiting with Pritchard. He was wearing a new shirt, dark blue, pressed clean. His hair was combed back, his beard trimmed. He looked nervous. When he saw Lena, his expression shifted to something that made her chest ache. You look beautiful, Sia, he said. You clean up pretty well yourself. Judge Hastings cleared her throat. If you two are done making eyes at each other, we have a ceremony to perform. They stood before the judge, Pritchard and Beatrice flanking them as witnesses. Dearly beloved, Judge Hastings began, then stopped. Actually, let's skip the formalities. You two have been through enough without me droning on about love and commitment. You know what those words mean better than most people who stand in this room. She looked at Ethan. Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? To stand beside her through whatever comes next, good or bad? I do, Ethan said. His voice was steady. The judge turned to Lena. And do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? To build a life with him, even when it's hard, even when you're tired, even when the mountain tries to break you both? Lena smiled. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the Wyoming Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. She paused. You may kiss each other, though based on what I saw when you walked in, you probably don't need my permission. Ethan kissed Lena, and the small room erupted in applause. When they broke apart, Pritchard was dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. Told you I'd cry, he muttered. After the ceremony, they all went to the boarding house for cake. Beatrice had outdone herself, 3 layers, white frosting, wildflowers on top. The homesteaders crowded into the dining room, talking and laughing and sharing stories. Someone brought out a fiddle and started playing. Margaret Porter sang. James Holloway danced with Clara Brennan, both of them laughing like they'd forgotten what it was like to have fun. Lena stood in the corner, watching it all, feeling like her heart might burst. Ethan found her there. You all right? Yeah, just taking it in. It's a lot. It's perfect. She looked up at him. Thank you. For what? For not giving up on me. For believing I'd stay when everyone else left. Ethan pulled her close. You're the one who chose to stay. I just got lucky. They stayed at the boarding house that night, their wedding night, in a room Beatrice had decorated with more wildflowers and clean linens. I know it's not fancy, she'd said, but it's the best I've got. It was perfect. Lena and Ethan lay in the darkness, holding each other, listening to the sounds of the town settling down for the night. What are you thinking about? Lena asked. How different everything is now. 6 months ago, I was alone on that mountain, convinced I'd die alone. Now I've got you. And a future that actually means something. You always had a future, you just couldn't see it. Maybe. He kissed the top of her head. What about you? Any regrets? About marrying you? No. About leaving Philadelphia? Lena thought about it. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd stayed, whether I would have been happy in that world. And I know I wouldn't have been. Because that life wasn't mine. It was the life someone else wanted for me. She turned to face him. This life is hard. It's harder than anything I ever imagined, but it's mine, ours, and that makes all the difference. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I love you. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. Lena felt tears spring to her eyes. I love you too. They left Laramie the next morning and headed back to the mountain. But this time everything felt different. They weren't just 2 people trying to survive. They were partners, husband and wife, building something that would last. When they reached the cabin, Ethan carried Lena over the threshold. What are you doing? She laughed. It's tradition. Since when do you care about tradition? Since I married you. He set her down inside and they both looked around. The cabin was small. The roof still leaked in one spot they'd missed. The floor was uneven, the furniture was rough, but it was home. Over the next few weeks, they threw themselves into improving the place. The restitution money had come through, $347, more than Lena had ever imagined having at one time. They used it carefully. First, they bought lumber and hired help to build the second room. It took 2 weeks, but when it was done, They had a proper bedroom with a real bed, a window that opened, and enough space to actually move around. Then they fixed the last leak in the roof, reinforced the barn, built a proper chicken coop that wouldn't blow over in the first strong wind. They bought 6 more cows, bringing their herd to 18. Ethan was meticulous about checking each one, making sure they were healthy, well-fed, ready to survive another winter. Lena expanded the garden. She cleared another plot of land, built more raised beds, planted everything she could think of. Potatoes, carrots, beans, squash, even herbs. "You planning to feed an army?" Ethan asked one afternoon, watching her work. "I'm planning to make sure we never go hungry again." He helped her finish the planting, and when the first shoots started coming up a few weeks later, they both stood there looking at the green pushing through the soil like it was a miracle. "It's working," Lena said. "Yeah, it is." Summer settled over the mountain like a warm blanket. The days were long and hot, the work endless but satisfying. They fell into a rhythm, up before dawn, tend the animals, work the garden, make repairs, fall into bed exhausted. But it was good exhaustion, the kind that came from building something real. One evening in late July, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Lena said, "I've been thinking." "About what?" "About winter. About what happens when the homesteaders start struggling again." Ethan looked at her. "What do you mean?" "We won the lawsuit. We got our water back. But that doesn't solve everything. Some of those people are barely hanging on. One bad season and they'll lose everything. And you want to help them, don't you?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "What did you have in mind?" "I don't know yet. Maybe we could pool resources, share equipment, help each other with big jobs. Create some kind of, I don't know what to call it, a cooperative? You want to organize the homesteaders. I want to make sure what happened with Rocky Mountain doesn't happen again. If we work together, we're stronger." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "That's a big undertaking." "I know. And people might not go for it. A lot of homesteaders are pretty independent. Then we convince them." He looked at her, and Lena could see him turning the idea over in his mind. "All right," he said finally, "let's try." They spent the next month visiting homesteads, talking to people, laying out the idea. Some were skeptical, some were interested but cautious. But slowly, they started to get commitments. Thomas Garrett was the first to sign on. "Makes sense to help each other. None of us are going to make it alone." Margaret Porter was next. "I've got sewing skills. I can make clothes, mend things. If someone needs help with that, I'll trade for other services." Clara Brennan offered to teach children. "Most of these homesteads are too far from town for proper schooling. I can hold classes, teach reading and writing." By the end of August, they had 15 homesteaders committed to the cooperative. They held their first official meeting in Laramie, in a room above the dry goods store. Lena stood at the front, nervous but determined. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "I know everyone's busy, so I'll keep this short. The idea is simple. We help each other. Share equipment, trade skills, support each other through hard times. Nobody profits, nobody loses. We just make sure we all survive." "And who's in charge?" someone asked. "Nobody. We make decisions together. Vote on things if we need to." "What about disputes?" "We work them out, like adults." There was some laughter at that. They talked for 2 hours, working out details, setting up rules, figuring out logistics. By the end, everyone had agreed to try it for a year. "If it works, we keep going," Lena said. "If it doesn't, we part ways. No hard feelings." They called it the Ridge Homesteaders Alliance. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As fall approached, Lena started to notice changes in her body. She was tired more often. Her clothes felt tighter around the waist, and she'd missed her monthly cycle twice now. She didn't say anything at first, didn't want to get Ethan's hopes up in case she was wrong. But by the third missed cycle, she couldn't deny it anymore. She was pregnant. She told Ethan on a quiet Sunday afternoon. They were sitting by the fire, mending clothes, comfortable in the silence. "I need to tell you something," Lena said. Ethan looked up from the sock he was darning. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least, I don't think it is." "Lena, you're scaring me." She took a breath. "I'm pregnant." Ethan went very still. The sock fell from his hands. What? I'm pregnant. About 3 months, I think. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak. Then he stood up and walked to the window. Lena's heart sank. Ethan, I'm going to be a father. Yes. He turned around, and he was smiling, that huge, unguarded smile that transformed his entire face. I'm going to be a father. You're not upset? Upset? Lena, this is... He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. She held on to him, feeling the tension drain from her body. I was worried you'd think it was too soon. Too soon? We've been married 4 months, living together for almost a year. If anything, I was starting to worry it might not happen. Really? Really? He pulled back to look at her. Are you happy about it? Terrified, but happy. Good, because we're doing this together. They spent the evening making plans. They'd need to expand the cabin again, add another room for the baby. They'd need supplies, clothes, a cradle. I'll build one, Ethan said, like my father did for me. You remember that? It's one of the only things I remember about him. He died when I was 5. Ethan's expression turned distant. But I remember him building that cradle, sanding it for hours to make sure there weren't any splinters. My mother said he sang to me every night before bed. What happened to him? Logging accident. Tree fell wrong. Ethan shook his head. My mother tried to keep the homestead going, but it was too much. We lost everything. That's why I came here. Wanted to build something that couldn't be taken away. Lena took his hand. You did. We did. Yeah, we did. The next few months were a blur of preparation. Ethan built the new room, then started on the cradle. He worked on it every evening, carving details into the wood. Animals, trees, mountains. It's beautiful, Lena said, watching him work. It's not done yet. It's still beautiful. The women from the cooperative started coming by with gifts. Clara brought baby clothes. Margaret brought blankets. Even Beatrice made the trip up from Laramie with a box of supplies. You're going to need these, she said. Diapers, ointment, all the things they don't tell you about until you need them. Winter came early that year, but Lena barely noticed. She was too focused on getting ready, making sure everything was perfect. Her belly grew round and heavy. Moving became difficult. She couldn't work in the garden anymore, couldn't haul water, couldn't do half the things she'd been doing. It drove her crazy. I'm not an invalid, she snapped at Ethan one morning when he tried to help her stand up. I know, but you're carrying our child. Let me help. I've been taking care of myself my whole life, and now you're taking care of both of you, which means letting someone else help for once. Lena wanted to argue, but she was too tired. Fine, she said, but I'm not sitting around doing nothing. I wouldn't dream of it. She spent the winter sewing baby clothes, mending everything they owned, planning for the future. And when the baby started moving, little flutters at first, then real kicks, Ethan would put his hand on her belly and talk to it. You're going to love it here, he'd say. Mountains, fresh air, all the space you could want. Your mother and I have built something good, something worth growing up in. Lena would watch him, her heart so full it ached. This was what she'd come west for. Not the land, not the freedom. This, a family, a home, a life that mattered. The baby came on a cold morning in March, just as the first snow was starting to melt. Lena woke to contractions so strong she couldn't breathe through them. Ethan was beside her instantly, his face pale. I'm getting help, he said. There's no time. Lena, there's no time. She grabbed his hand. You're going to have to help me. For a moment, pure terror crossed his face. Then he nodded. Tell me what to do. The labor lasted 6 hours. 6 brutal hours where Lena thought she might break apart. But Ethan stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand, talking her through it, refusing to let her give up even when she begged him to. And finally, when the sun was just starting to rise, the baby came. A girl, tiny and red-faced and screaming at the top of her lungs. Ethan wrapped her in a blanket with shaking hands and placed her in Lena's arms. She's perfect, he whispered. Lena looked down at her daughter, at the dark hair still wet from birth, the scrunched face, the tiny fists waving, and felt something shift in her chest. This was it. This was everything. "What should we name her?" Ethan asked. Lena thought for a moment. "Hope." Hope. Because that's what she is, our hope for the future. Proof that we didn't just survive, we built something that'll outlast us both. Ethan kissed Lena's forehead, then the baby's. "Hope it is." The first few weeks were chaos. Hope cried constantly. She wouldn't sleep more than an hour at a time. Lena was exhausted, running on nothing but coffee and sheer determination, but she'd never been happier. Ethan was a better father than Lena had dared to hope. He learned to change diapers without complaint. He walked Hope around the cabin at 3 in the morning. He sang to her, the same songs his father had sung to him. And when Lena was too tired to move, he'd take over completely, letting her sleep. "You're good at this," she told him one night. "I'm terrified I'm doing it wrong." "You're not. Trust me." Spring came slowly, but when it arrived, it brought transformation. The garden exploded with growth, bigger and better than Lena had imagined. The cattle herd was thriving, and Hope was growing stronger every day. On Hope's 3-month birthday, the cooperative held a celebration. All the homesteaders came up to the cabin, bringing food and gifts. Thomas Garrett brought a wooden toy he'd carved. Margaret Porter brought a quilt. Claire Brennan brought books for when Hope was old enough to read. They ate together, talked together, watched their children play together. And Lena stood on the porch with Hope in her arms, looking out at the community they'd built, and realized something. She'd spent her whole life running from being trapped, from being forced into a life that wasn't hers. But here, in the last place anyone would have expected, she'd found exactly what she'd been looking for. Not freedom from responsibility, but the freedom to choose what mattered. And she'd chosen this mountain, this man, this life. It hadn't been easy. It had been brutal and hard, and there were days when she'd wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. But standing here now, with Ethan's arm around her waist and Hope sleeping against her chest, Lena knew with absolute certainty she'd made the right choice. And she'd keep making it every single day for the rest of her life. The restitution money came 6 weeks after Hope was born. Pritchard rode up the mountain himself to deliver it, $347 in bills that felt impossibly crisp in Lena's tired hands. She was standing on the porch with Hope sleeping in a sling against her chest, and the sight of that much money made her head spin. "This is your share," Pritchard said, dismounting. "The other homesteaders got theirs last week. Most are already making improvements." Ethan came out of the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. "What happened to the company?" "Shut down completely. The territorial attorney filed criminal charges against Greer and 5 other executives. Trial set for September." Pritchard adjusted his hat. "Word is, they'll all do time, and the company's assets are being liquidated, everything sold off to pay remaining debts and fines." "So it's really over," Lena said. "For you, yes. For them?" Pritchard smiled grimly. "They're going to be dealing with this for years. But that's not your concern anymore." After he left, Lena and Ethan sat at the table with the money spread between them. Hope had woken up and was fussing, so Lena nursed her while they talked. $347, Ethan said quietly. "That's more than most homesteaders see in 5 years. What should we do with it? What do you want to do with it?" Lena looked around the cabin. It was sturdier than when she'd arrived, but still small, still rough in places. "We need a bigger cabin. Hope's not going to fit in that tiny room forever." "Agreed. What else?" "More cattle, better equipment, seeds for a bigger garden." She paused. "And maybe some saved for emergencies. Winter, illness, whatever comes." Ethan nodded slowly. "That's smart, conservative. But nothing. You're right." He counted out $100 and set it aside. "This is for emergencies. The rest, we use to build." They spent the next week making lists, planning, arguing good-naturedly about priorities. Ethan wanted to focus on the cattle. Lena wanted to expand the garden and invest in preserving equipment so they could store food through winter. "We need both," she said finally. "So we do both. Just smaller than we'd planned." "Compromise?" "Compromise." The work started in earnest once spring fully arrived. Ethan hired 3 men from Laramie to help build an addition to the cabin, 2 more rooms, a proper kitchen, and a stone fireplace that would heat the whole house. It took 6 weeks, but when it was done, they had a home that felt permanent, solid. Lena worked on the garden every day, hope strapped to her back. She cleared more land, built more beds, planted everything she could think of. Potatoes, carrots, beans, squash, tomatoes, herbs. She even tried corn, though Ethan said it wouldn't grow at this altitude. "We'll see," Lena said. By mid-June, the garden was thriving, the corn was growing, and Lena felt a fierce satisfaction every time she looked at it. They bought 8 more cattle, young heifers, all healthy. Ethan built a second pasture and spent hours each day checking fences, rotating grazing areas, making sure the herd stayed strong. "You're obsessed," Lena teased him one evening. "I'm careful. There's a difference. You checked on them 3 times today, and I'll check on them 3 times tomorrow." He looked at her. "We've got 26 head of cattle now. That's a real herd. That's a future." Lena understood. This wasn't just about the animals. It was about proving that everything they'd fought for had been worth it, that they could actually do this. Summer settled over the mountain like a benediction. The days were long and warm, the work hard but satisfying. Hope grew bigger, stronger, more alert. She started smiling at 8 weeks, laughing at 10. By 3 months, she could hold her head up. By 4, she was reaching for things. Lena documented everything in a journal she'd started keeping. First smile, first laugh, first time she grabbed her own foot. "Why are you writing all this down?" Ethan asked one night. "Because I don't want to forget, and because someday Hope might want to know what her first year was like." "She's not going to remember any of this." "I know, but I will." The Ridge Homesteaders Alliance grew stronger through the summer. They held monthly meetings in Laramie, rotating who hosted. People shared resources, traded skills, helped each other with big projects. When Thomas Garrett's barn roof collapsed in a storm, 8 homesteaders showed up the next day to help rebuild it. When Margaret Porter got sick and couldn't work her garden, Clara Brennan and 3 others harvested everything and preserved it for her. When James Holloway needed help moving a boulder that was blocking his spring, it took 12 men to shift it, but they got it done. "This is working," Ethan said after one meeting. "Better than I thought it would." People want to help each other. They just needed someone to organize it. "You organized it." "We organized it," Lena corrected. "Don't sell yourself short." But she knew he was right. The cooperative had been her idea, and she'd been the one pushing it forward. And watching it succeed felt almost as good as winning the lawsuit. Almost. One afternoon in late July, Lena was in the garden when she heard horses approaching. She straightened up, shading her eyes against the sun. 2 riders were coming up the path, men she didn't recognize. Ethan emerged from the barn, rifle in hand but held low. "Can I help you?" The first rider tipped his hat. "Looking for Lena Voss, or I guess it's Lena Cross now." "Who's asking?" The man dismounted. "Name's Robert Caldwell. I'm a reporter for the Cheyenne Leader. I heard about what you did, taking down Rocky Mountain land development. I'd like to write a story about it." Lena walked over, wiping dirt from her hands. "I already talked to reporters right after the trial." "I know, but those were local papers. I'm talking about a feature story, something that would run in papers across the territory, maybe even back east." Caldwell pulled out a notebook. "People need to hear what you did. A woman homesteader taking on a corrupt land company and winning? That's news." "I wasn't alone. There were 23 other plaintiffs. But you were the one who started it. You were the one who broke into their office to get the evidence." Lena felt Ethan tense beside her. "I never said I broke in anywhere." "You didn't have to. I've done my research." Caldwell smiled. "Don't worry, I'm not here to get you in trouble. I'm here to tell your story." "What if I don't want my story told?" "Then a lot of people are going to keep getting exploited by companies like Rocky Mountain, because they won't know that it's possible to fight back." He paused. "Your story gives people hope, Mrs. Cross. Don't you think they deserve that?" Lena looked at Ethan. He shrugged. "Your choice." She turned back to Caldwell. 1 hour, and you don't use Hope's name or describe where we live. I won't have people coming up here bothering us. Deal." They sat on the porch, and Lena told him everything. about arriving in Wyoming with nothing, about the 8 brides who'd left before her, about the wolves and the winter and William Greer showing up with his fraudulent survey. Caldwell scribbled notes furiously. And you weren't afraid when you went into that office? I was terrified, but being afraid didn't change what needed to be done. What would you say to other women in similar situations? Women who feel powerless? Lena thought about it. I'd say power isn't something you're given, it's something you take. Not by force, but by refusing to accept that you don't have any. She paused. I came here because I wanted a life that was mine, not my father's, not society's, mine. And I learned that having that life means fighting for it every single day. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Caldwell finished writing and looked up. One more question. Do you have any regrets? About leaving your old life? About choosing this one? Lena glanced at Ethan, who was sitting in the doorway with hope in his arms, not even for a second. The article ran 3 weeks later. Pritchard brought a copy up to the cabin, along with 2 other newspapers that had reprinted it. Lena read it slowly, her heart pounding. The headline read, Woman Homesteader Defeats Land Company in Historic Case. Caldwell had done a good job. He'd captured the story without sensationalizing it, had made her sound strong without making her sound superhuman. He'd quoted her accurately and had kept his promise. No mention of hope or the exact location of the homestead. But what struck Lena most was the ending. When asked what she wants readers to take away from her story, Mrs. Cross said simply, that it's worth fighting for what matters, even if you're scared, even if everyone tells you it's impossible, because the alternative, giving up, is worse than any failure. In a territory built on the backs of people who refuse to give up, Lena Cross has proven herself to be exactly the kind of citizen Wyoming needs. Ethan read it over her shoulder. He made you sound like a hero. I'm not a hero. I just did what had to be done. That's what heroes do. Over the next month, letters started arriving. They came addressed to Mrs. Lena Cross, Wyoming Territory, with no other information, but somehow they found their way to the cabin. Letters from women back east, from other homesteaders, from people who'd been cheated by land companies in other territories. Lena read every single one. Some were heartbreaking. Women trapped in marriages they couldn't escape. Families who'd lost everything to fraud. People who felt powerless and alone. Others were hopeful. People who'd been inspired to fight back, to stand up for themselves, to refuse to accept injustice. Lena tried to answer as many as she could, writing late into the night by lamplight while Hope slept. You don't have to respond to all of them, Ethan said. Yes, I do. These people reached out because they needed to know someone cared. I can't ignore that. But you're exhausted. I'll sleep when I'm dead. He smiled. Stubborn woman. You married me knowing that. Best decision I ever made. In September, the criminal trial began. Lena and Ethan didn't attend. They had a homestead to run and a baby to care for, but Pritchard sent regular updates. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of fraud, forgery, and extortion. The defense tried to argue that the survey changes had been legitimate corrections, but the jury didn't buy it. William Greer was sentenced to 5 years in prison. 2 other executives got 3 years each. The company was dissolved, its remaining assets seized. When Pritchard brought the news, Lena felt a strange sense of closure. It's really over, she said. It really is. That night, she and Ethan sat on the porch watching the sunset. Hope was asleep in her cradle inside, the cattle were settled in the pasture, and the garden was heavy with vegetables ready for harvest. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd given up? Ethan asked. If you'd just paid the $50 like they wanted? All the time. And we'd still be barely surviving. We wouldn't have expanded the cabin or bought more cattle. We wouldn't have the cooperative. She paused. And 23 other families would still be getting robbed. Ethan was quiet for a moment. You changed everything. We changed everything. Together. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. You just didn't know it yet. He took her hand. I'm glad I didn't have to find out. As fall approached, Lena began preparing for winter with an intensity that surprised even her. She preserved everything from the garden, canning vegetables, drying herbs, making preserves. She sewed warmer clothes for Hope, who was growing faster than Lena could keep up with. She helped Ethan stockpile firewood, check the barn for leaks, prepare the cattle for the cold. "You're going overboard," Ethan said one afternoon. "I'm being prepared. You've got enough canned goods to feed an army. And if we have a bad winter, we'll need them." But it wasn't just about survival. It was about proving to herself as much as anyone that she could do this, that she could take care of her family no matter what came. The first snow fell in late October, earlier than usual. Lena woke to find the world transformed, white and clean and silent. She stood at the window with Hope in her arms, showing her the snow. "See that? That's winter. You're going to hate it at first, but eventually you'll learn to love it." Hope grabbed at the window, leaving tiny handprints on the glass. Ethan came up behind them. "Think she knows what she's looking at?" "Probably not, but I want her to see it anyway." "You're a good mother." Lena turned to look at him. "You think so?" "I know so." The words settled into her chest, warm and solid. She'd spent so much of her life worried about not being enough, not strong enough, not capable enough, not worthy enough. But standing here with her husband and daughter, in the home they'd built together, she finally understood something. She was enough. She'd always been enough. Winter came hard and fast that year. By November, the snow was 3 feet deep. The temperature dropped so low that water froze solid overnight. The wind howled like something alive, shaking the cabin walls. But this time, they were ready. The new fireplace kept the cabin warm. The preserved food kept them fed. The cattle stayed healthy in the improved barn. And on the coldest nights, when the wind was at its worst, Lena and Ethan would sit by the fire with Hope between them, telling stories and making plans for spring. "What do you want to plant next year?" Ethan asked one night. "Everything we planted this year, plus wheat. I want to try grinding our own flour." "That's ambitious." "We can handle ambitious." He smiled. "Yeah, we can." Hope started crawling in December. Lena was folding laundry when she noticed Hope had moved from where she'd been sitting. She looked around and found her daughter 3 feet away, reaching for a piece of firewood. "Ethan, she's crawling!" He came running from the other room, and they both watched as Hope pulled herself forward, awkward but determined. "Look at her," Ethan said, his voice thick. "She's so strong. She gets it from her father. She gets it from both of us." They spent the rest of the afternoon following Hope around the cabin, making sure she didn't hurt herself, marveling at every movement. That night, Lena wrote in her journal, "Today Hope crawled for the first time. She's so determined, so fearless. She doesn't know yet how hard the world can be. Part of me wants to protect her from ever finding out. But a bigger part of me wants to teach her to be strong enough to face it anyway." Christmas came quietly. They didn't have decorations or gifts or anything elaborate, but Ethan cut down a small pine tree and brought it inside. Lena strung it with dried berries and popcorn. They roasted one of the chickens and made bread from the last of their flour. And on Christmas morning, they gave Hope a wooden toy Ethan had carved, a small horse with a flowing mane. Hope grabbed it immediately and stuck it in her mouth. "I think she likes it," Lena said. "Either that or she's trying to eat it." They laughed, and it was the best Christmas Lena had ever had. January brought the coldest temperatures yet. For 2 weeks straight, the thermometer didn't rise above 0. The cattle huddled together for warmth. The chickens stopped laying. Even the fire seemed to struggle against the cold. But they survived, and in early February the temperature finally started to climb. "Worst of it's over," Ethan said, checking the thermometer. "We made it through." Lena felt a surge of relief so strong it made her dizzy. "Another winter down." "How many more you think you've got in you?" "As many as it takes." He pulled her close. "Good, because I'm not done with you yet." Spring came slowly, tentatively, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass and muddy earth. The cattle ventured out of the barn, blinking in the weak sunlight. The chickens started laying again. And Hope, now almost a year old, was walking. She'd taken her first steps in late February, and now she was unstoppable. She toddled around the cabin, exploring everything, getting into everything, laughing at everything. "She's fearless," Ethan said. catching her before she could pull a pot off the stove. She's a menace. She's perfect. Lena couldn't argue with that. In March, the cooperative held its first anniversary meeting. All the original members were there, plus 5 new homesteaders who'd joined over the winter. They gathered in the Laramie Town Hall and talked about what they'd accomplished. Thomas Garrett had expanded his herd. Margaret Porter was teaching 12 children now. Clara Brennan had started a small business making preserves. We're doing more than surviving, Garrett said. We're thriving, and it's because we're helping each other. So what's next? Someone asked. Lena stood up. She'd been thinking about this for weeks. I think we should formalize this. Make it official. Create bylaws, elect officers, maybe even incorporate. Why? Margaret asked. It's working fine as is. Because right now we're just a group of people helping each other. If we formalize it, we become something bigger. We can negotiate with suppliers as a group, get better prices. We can pool resources for bigger projects. We can have a real voice in territorial politics. There was silence as people considered this. Then Thomas Garrett said, I'm in. Others nodded. They voted unanimously to formalize the cooperative. Lena was elected president. Ethan became treasurer. Margaret Porter was secretary. This is going to be a lot of work, Ethan said on the ride home. Everything worth doing is a lot of work. You really believe that? I know that. Hope's first birthday came in late March. Lena baked a cake, lopsided and slightly burned, but made with love. They invited the nearest homesteaders. Clara, Margaret, Thomas all made the trip up the mountain. Hope smashed cake into her face and hair and laughed the whole time. She's going to be a handful, Clara said. She already is, Lena replied, but I wouldn't change a thing. After everyone left and Hope was asleep, Lena and Ethan sat on the porch watching the stars. 1 year, Ethan said. A year ago, she was born, and everything changed. Everything was already changing. She just made it better. Do you want more? More children, I mean. Lena thought about it. Eventually, maybe, when we're ready. And when will that be? I don't know. Ask me again in a year. He laughed. Deal. But they sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Ethan said, I never thanked you. For what? For choosing to stay. For fighting for this place. For believing in us when I couldn't believe in myself. He turned to look at her. I was so convinced that everyone would leave, that I'd always be alone, and then you came along and proved me wrong about everything. Lena felt tears prickling her eyes. You gave me a reason to stay, a life worth fighting for. We gave each other that. Yeah, we did. Summer came again, and with it, new growth. The garden exploded with vegetables. The herd grew to 32 head. Hope learned new words every day. Mama, dada, cow, tree, more. The cooperative flourished. They negotiated a deal with a supplier in Cheyenne for bulk purchases. They started a lending library, rotating books between homesteads. They even hired a circuit doctor to visit once a month. You're building something amazing, Pritchard told Lena during one visit. You know that, right? We all are. Together. Maybe, but it started with you. Lena didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. In August, another letter arrived. This one was different from the others. It was from a woman named Sarah Chen in California. She'd read about the lawsuit and the cooperative, and she wanted to start something similar in her community. Can you help me? She wrote. I don't know where to begin, but I know we need this. We need to help each other the way you're helping your homesteaders. Lena spent 3 days drafting a response. She laid out everything they'd learned, how to organize, how to get people committed, how to handle disputes, how to keep momentum going. When she was done, the letter was 12 pages long. You wrote her a manual, Ethan said, reading over it. She asked for help. I'm giving her help. You know she's going to share this with other people, right? And then those people will share it. This is going to spread. Good. More people should be doing this. The letter sent, Lena went back to her regular work. But over the next few months, more letters came. From Colorado, from Montana, from Kansas. People wanted to know how to organize, how to fight back against corrupt companies, how to build communities that actually supported each other. Lena answered every single one. "You're starting a movement," Ethan said one night. "I'm just answering letters." "You're doing more than that. You're teaching people that they have power, that they don't have to accept injustice." "Someone taught me the same thing." "Who?" Lena looked at him. "You. Every time you got up after being knocked down, every time you chose to keep fighting even when it seemed hopeless, you taught me that survival isn't just about staying alive, it's about refusing to give up on the life you want." Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I love you." "I love you too." Fall arrived again, painting the mountain in gold and red. Lena stood in the garden one afternoon, Hope playing at her feet, and looked around at everything they'd built. The cabin was solid and warm. The barn was full of healthy cattle. The pantry was stocked with preserved food. The cooperative was strong and growing, and most importantly, her family was happy. Hope grabbed Lena's skirt, pulling herself up. "Mama, up!" Lena picked her up, settling her on her hip. "What do you see, baby?" Hope pointed at the mountains. "Big." "Yeah, they're big, and they're ours. Yours, mine, and Daddy's." "Mine," Lena laughed. "That's right, yours." Ethan came out of the barn and walked over. He wrapped his arms around both of them. "What are you two doing?" "Just looking," Lena said. "At what?" "Everything." They stood there together, the three of them, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. And Lena thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fear and uncertainty of leaving Philadelphia, the brutal first months on the mountain, the wolves and the winter and the endless, backbreaking work, the lawsuit, the victory, the community they'd built. All of it had led to this moment, this life. She'd come to Wyoming looking for freedom, but what she'd found was something better, purpose, not the kind that was given to her or expected of her, but the kind she'd chosen for herself, the kind that came from fighting for what mattered, from refusing to accept less than she deserved, from building something real with someone who saw her, truly saw her, and chose to stay anyway. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked. "How far we've come." "We've come pretty far." "And how far we still have to go." He kissed the top of her head. "We'll get there, together." "Together," Lena agreed. Hope started squirming. "Down, down!" They set her down and watched her toddle toward the cabin, her little legs pumping with determination. "She's gonna be just like you," Ethan said. "Stubborn and hard-headed, strong and fearless. Let's hope she's smarter than both of us. She will be, because she's got us to teach her." They followed Hope inside where the fire was burning and dinner was waiting. And as Lena closed the door against the cooling evening air, she realized something. This was it. This was the life she'd been searching for. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Hers. The years that followed brought more changes. The cooperative grew to include 47 homesteads. They built a community hall, started a school, brought in a permanent doctor. Lena gave birth to a son 2 years after Hope. They named him Daniel, and he had Ethan's eyes and Lena's stubborn streak. The homestead continued to thrive. The cattle herd grew to 50 head. The garden expanded every year. They added chickens, then pigs, then sheep. Hope grew into a bright, curious child who asked 1,000 questions and never took no for an answer. Daniel was quieter, more thoughtful, but just as determined in his own way. And through it all, Lena and Ethan worked side by side, building a life that mattered. On Hope's 5th birthday, Lena took her daughter up to the ridge where she'd first arrived all those years ago. "This is where I met your father," Lena said. Hope looked around. "Here?" "Well, down there." Lena pointed to the cabin. "I walked up this path carrying everything I owned in one bag. I was so scared I could barely breathe." "Why were you scared?" "Because I didn't know if I could do it, if I was strong enough." "But you were." "Eventually. But it took time." Lena knelt down to Hope's level. "You know what I learned?" "What?" "That being strong doesn't mean you're never afraid. It means you do what needs to be done even when you are afraid." Hope thought about this. "I'm not afraid of anything." Lena smiled. "I know you're not, but someday you will be. And when that day comes, I want you to remember this. You come from people who didn't give up, who fought for what they believed in, who built something real out of nothing but stubbornness and hope. Like you and Daddy? Like me and Daddy? And like all the people who came before us and all the people who'll come after. Hope threw her arms around Lena's neck. I love you, Mama. I love you too, baby. They walked back down to the cabin together, hand in hand. That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Lena pulled out her journal. She'd been keeping it for 5 years now, documenting everything. The victories and the failures, the joy and the heartbreak, the ordinary moments that made up a life. She opened to a fresh page and began to write. Today I realized something. I came to this mountain looking for freedom, and I found it. But not the freedom I expected. Not freedom from responsibility or hardship or struggle. I found the freedom to choose what my life would be, to decide what mattered and fight for it with everything I had. I chose this mountain, this man, this life. And every day, I choose it again. That's the real freedom. Not the absence of difficulty, but the power to face it on your own terms. I hope my children learn that. I hope they understand that the life worth living isn't the easy one. It's the one you build yourself, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. I hope they know they come from strength, from people who refused to give up, who looked at impossible odds and said, "Watch me anyway," because that's what we did, Ethan and I, and all the homesteaders who stood with us. We didn't just survive. We didn't just endure. We built something that will outlast us, something that matters. And if that's not worth fighting for, I don't know what is. She closed the journal and set it aside. Ethan was already in bed, reading by lamplight. He looked up when she came in. Kids asleep? Finally, Hope wanted 3 more stories. She always does. He set the book aside. Come here. Lena climbed into bed beside him, and he wrapped his arms around her. You ever regret it? He asked. Choosing this life? Never. Not even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, because the hard parts remind me why it's worth it. He kissed her forehead. I don't deserve you. Yes, you do. You just didn't believe you did. There's a difference. They lay in the darkness, listening to the wind outside. Ethan? Yeah. Thank you. For what? For letting me stay, for believing in me when I barely believed in myself, for building this life with me. You did most of the building. We did it together. That's what makes it matter. He held her tighter. Yeah, together. And in the quiet of that mountain cabin, surrounded by the life they'd fought so hard to build, Lena finally understood what it meant to be home. Not a place, not even a person, but a choice. The choice to stand and fight instead of run. The choice to build instead of accept. The choice to love even when it was terrifying, to hope even when it seemed foolish, to keep going even when every instinct said to quit. That was what home was. And she'd found it on a brutal Wyoming ridge, with a man who'd been abandoned by everyone else, building a life that no one thought would last. They'd proven everyone wrong, and they'd keep proving them wrong every single day for the rest of their lives. Because that's what you did when you found something worth fighting for. You fought, and you won. Not because it was easy, but because it mattered. And nothing, not the mountain, not the winter, not the wolves, not the land companies, not the doubt, could take that away. On a ridge that had broken 8 women before her, Lena Voss Cross had built something unbreakable. A home, a family, a future. And the man who'd been abandoned by everyone had finally become the man worth staying for. Not because he'd changed who he was, but because she'd seen who he'd always been, and chosen him anyway, just like he'd chosen her. Again, and again, and again. Until choosing each other became as natural as breathing. That was the real victory. Not defeating the land company, not winning the lawsuit, not building the cooperative, but finding someone who saw your worst and loved you anyway, who stood beside you when the world tried to break you, who chose you every single day and made that choice mean something. That was what mattered. That was what lasted. And as Lena drifted off to sleep in Ethan's arms, with her children safe in the next room and the mountain wind singing outside, she knew with absolute certainty she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to do, with exactly who she was supposed to be with. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.